Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, you know, I used to work in the news business, and there is some criticism of news reporters and of the journalism industry in general. A lot of people say there's not enough good news out there. Well, I don't know about that, but you know, they say if it bleeds, it leads, and that oftentimes is true, particularly of the electronic media, because immediacy is the name of the game, and when tragedy's out there, they're all over it. But when the tragedy's over with, sometimes that story goes away. Well, the beauty of this podcast is I can maybe give life to a story that continues to live on. And the story that really deserves to live on that I'm talking about today is the survivors of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Parkland, Florida school shooting. They were in Des Moines recently, appearing at Ray Gun's T-shirt shop. And the reason they were there was to celebrate and participate in a landmark, historic U.S. Supreme Court ruling. And you may recall hearing about that Supreme Court ruling. It was Tinker versus the City of Des Moines Public Schools. And I mean, we're in the Wayback Machine here. This goes way back to the early days of the Vietnam War, actually. And some middle school students, I don't think they were even in high school yet, wanted to wear black armbands to school to protest the Vietnam War. And the school said, no, you can't do that. And they said, yes, we can. And more importantly, their parents said, yes, they can. And they took the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they won. Students can express their views, particularly political views, in school. And that's why the Marjory Stoneman, Parkland, Florida students were in Des Moines. And they were promoting a couple of books. And one of them is entitled, We Say Never Again. And I'm going to read from the dust jacket, the inside of the book here, just briefly to kind of explain what that book is all about. It says, Our story, our lives, our school. While the world reported on the events at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, the students themselves were reporting the story and living through it. Many of the most impactful voices in the Never Again movement came through the school's journalism and broadcasting programs, and they've credited their teachers and the training they received for allowing them to think critically and communicate clearly, enabling them to launch a movement that has inspired a nation. And if you've seen, particularly that March on Washington, those wonderful speeches that they made, just heart-rendering speeches, you'll never forget it. I never will. But how do student journalists report effectively when they've become the story? How do they write about loss when it impacts their own lives so deeply? The insight the students have gained about the media ethics and reaching the public has not only motivated others to join this movement, but has encouraged them to start movements of their own. Reporting from inside the media storm that followed the Parkland tragedy, these clear-eyed and passionate young reporters bring a fresh perspective to a crucial American issue while shining a bright light on the importance of journalism in our free society. Hear, how wonderful, how great is that? The student that we're going to hear from today is a journalist she's a school journalist, but she's a professional journalist in the wings. Rebecca Schneid, she's a junior, a second-year staff member of the Eagle Eye at Marjory Stoneman, and served as the co-editor-in-chief in the last school year. She's also an officer of the Politics Club, the Key Club, and the Spanish Honor Society, and has been a member of the National Honor Society, the National English Honor Society, and the Math Honor Society. While Rebecca has a passion for biology, she's found her true calling in political science and journalism, where she enjoys writing hard-hitting features. And I was really honored just to meet her, just to have an opportunity to talk about her, because you've heard me say on this podcast before, I mean, we're all about hook shots and fastballs and, you know, glory and glamour on the fields of battle of athletics in the public schools, but a lot of times these kids don't get their due when it comes to scholastics, and if there's anybody that's due, anybody that should have our undivided attention, it's those folks from Marjory Stoneman. So let's go to the basement. Let's go down there where it's a little bit quieter at Ray Gun's T-shirt shop, and we pick up the conversation with Rebecca Schneid after I've asked her what brings her to Des Moines.
Well, we're here, again, like you said, to celebrate the Tinker anniversary, which gave many of us the rights to speak out and gave us the confidence to do so as well, and the understanding that we have the opportunity as kids, that it doesn't matter how old we are, that we still have the right to say what we believe in, because it doesn't matter how old you are. If you're old enough to be affected by the ills of society, you're old enough to have a say in it. And not only that, but we're here also, our teachers are right now signing and giving and looking at books, the books that each of which I have written in. Parkland Speaks book, which I wrote a poem in about my personal feelings, and in the Never Again, We Say Never Again book, I wrote about my experience as a student journalist during all of that last year, at and after the shooting and at the March for Our Lives and everything like that.
Kind of explain the difference between the two books. One is by students, one is by faculty, or no?
No. Well, so the Parkland Speaks book, well, I'll start with the We Say Never Again book. That was created by student journalists, the journalists of the Eagle Eye, me and my peers, and also some journalists in the TV production group, the WMSD. And in that, we talk more about our experiences as journalists and also as activists and our experiences last year. And the Parkland Speaks book, the We Say Never Again book is more about hard journalism and speaking out about certain things, while the Parkland Speaks book is more about creative writing. There's a way more poems and personal essays and diary entries, and it's more personal in that way, and a creative writing outlet. And so I was able to utilize both sides of myself through each book. Yeah.
I mentioned that my wife and I watched the Washington speeches, and very moving, and like millions of Americans were moved by that. And my wife wept when she watched it, and she's going to really love this particular podcast and hearing from you. And the first thing she's going to want to know is, how are you? How are you guys doing? How are you and your classmates doing at this point in time?
Well, I think that it's a different kind of hurt than it was in the beginning of when the shooting had first happened. I think that obviously we had utilized our, whether that be journalism or activism or whatever we were doing, to alleviate some of that pain and make us and distract us a little bit from that initial grief. But it eventually came to haunt us, and I think that obviously it's been about a year now, and it doesn't just go away, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. So we're still dealing with the aftermath of it, and we're still in pain. Obviously, I think we're going to be in pain, for the rest of our lives, if not, for many, many years. But in general, I think that it's a day-by-day thing that we go through. So some days are better than other days. Some days things trigger us. Sometimes, at least this is my personal opinion, or my personal experience. I don't think that I can speak for everybody, but some days are harder than other days. And there's some people that go through harder trauma than I have been through, some people who haven't. And so it's really a personal basis, but I know for all of us, we're just trying to take it day by day.
The thing I'm struck by listening to you now and then and always, and I went to high school. I know high school kids. You're very bright, very articulate. And you're a journalist to be. Were you always that way? Is your class just that way? Do you have a lot of really smart, articulate kids, or did this tragedy kind of make you that way? Did you have to become that way to get this story told?
Well, I think that for myself, and I think for a lot of my peers who have spoken out, we have our teachers to thank for the ways in which that we are able to articulate ourselves, articulate our position, understand our rights and utilize them in a way that we knew that we had the ability to, and in the same way advocate for the rights that we believe that we deserved. I think that we have our teachers to thank for that. I think that as well we have our community to thank for that, because they've always been really supportive and supportive in our abilities, and they told us from a young age that we have the ability to change things, and that's not the way. And I don't necessarily know that it would have gone the same way in some community where they wouldn't have supported the kids as much as we've been supported by our community, by our teachers, by everyone. Yeah.
That's great. That's well said. Well, last question, I guess. Obviously, you folks are activists when it comes to gun rights, gun controls, common sense laws regarding gun restrictions. But also, since this tragedy down in Florida, there's this movement underway to make media the enemy, to make journalists outlaws almost. You're a journalist to be. Are you addressing that issue also? Is that something you're talking about when you appear around the country?
Well, definitely. I don't think that that's necessarily as connected to since the shooting. But, I mean, I have always been an advocate for journalists, and I believe that journalism is the heart of democracy. It is the ability for people to understand what is going on in politics, and for them to thus hold politicians accountable for their actions. They wouldn't be able to do that if journalists weren't out there reporting on these things. And fake news was a thing before Donald Trump had said it, and it's a thing that we combat in the journalism community as well. But I think that the most important thing is, right now we're having the most media consumption percentage-wise that we've ever had in the world, and we have access to Twitter and all these social media that spread these things around. But we also have the least journalism the trust in journalism that we've in one of the least trust in journalism that we've ever had in history. And I think that that's super disillusioning and super sad, because journalists, like I said, are the heart of democracy, and they're the ones that are supposed to be keeping the electorate and the American people informed on. And I think that there's a reason why they brand journalists as enemies. There's a reason. They want to keep people uninformed. They want to keep people uninformed so they can keep doing what they believe is going to benefit them as people, but it's not going to benefit the American people. And that's where journalists come in and have to inform them on these things. And that's what I think. Student journalists and student voices are the most important things that we have in this country right now. And they're the good things that are going to keep us afloat, even when some people are trying to bring us down.
Great. Well, in closing, is there anything in particular that you always like to make sure everybody knows every time that you appear somewhere and speak to someone that maybe you could close with?
I think I had already kind of said it, but I think that, I'm 17 years old. I can't even vote yet. But I can't vote, but I can help change things in society. And I think that any kid, whether they be 14, 15, 16, it doesn't matter how old you are. Like I said, if you are old enough to be affected by the ills of society, you're old enough to stand up for them. And whatever you have to say, whether you're a journalist, whether you're an activist, whether you are somewhere in between and you don't know what you want to do, write about it, speak about it, and try to affect change in your community, no matter how small, because you should understand that you have the right to do that, and you have the ability to if you just speak up loud enough and you join with other people with similar beliefs.
Wow. So is that any good? I mean, I'm going to jump back in here and tell you that I remember being 17 years old. I couldn't string two sentences together. I mean, Rebecca's up from Florida to attend this Tinker celebration in Des Moines. I couldn't find my way across Des Moines when I was 17 years old. And, and her poise and ability to answer these questions and to articulate. My God, I remember I thought I was going to faint during the high school play, attended by a few dozen parents. I just remember what that was like. And to listen to her lay this out, I mean, it's just really impressive. And after what she's gone through, it kind of brings a tear to the eye. Well, okay, as I mentioned, the second book that she is a part of is called Parkland Speaks. Survivors from Marjory Stoneman Douglas share their story. And the back cover of that reads, "It is raw, it is real, it happened to them." The students of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School share their emotional journeys that began on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 2018, and continues today. This revealing and unfiltered look at teens living in the wake of tragedy is a poignant representation of grief, anger, determination, healing, and hope. Now, the intimate collection includes poetry, eyewitness accounts, letters, speeches, journal entries, drawings, and photographs from the events of February 14th and its aftermath. Full of heartbreaking loss, a rally cry for change, and hope for a safe future, these artistic pieces will inspire readers to reflect on their own lives and the importance of valuing and protecting the ones you love. And as Rebecca mentioned, she writes a poem in this particular volume, and Rebecca's poem is entitled "A Zoo Animal," and I asked her to read an excerpt. Listen in.
Some people tell us to wait, we must be patient, we cannot exploit the deaths of our classmates. Well, that frustrates me. People die every day. You remain blind and think that this country can be great without legislation that attempts to eliminate the hate. Because the revolution is not waiting, the revolution is not coming, the revolution is now, it is angry, it is hungry, and it is a force to be reckoned with. I realize that I don't just feel like a zoo animal, I am a zoo animal. I have been a zoo animal. These bars have been around me for so long that I'm conditioned to think that it is normal. It is not. So while we may not be immortal, this passion, this fervor, this persistence for resistance is. We will not rest until these bars are broken, until we are zoo animals no more, but instead free of the shackles we once bore.
read that flawlessly. So I don't know if you heard that little tidbit at the end, but I told her that she read that flawlessly. I mean, I've worked in broadcasting with folks that couldn't read that much continuously without an error, and she read it perfectly. I told her she might have a future in broadcast journalism, and she seemed to like that. And I also told her that wherever you go, wherever you travel, wherever the kids of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School end up, they're always going to be beloved by a lot of Americans based on what they've already done. And they're only, in the instance of Rebecca, 17 years old. Think of what's yet to come, what might still be accomplished. We'll look for the titles of these books, Parkland Speaks, and We Say Never Again. I'll put the titles of those books and maybe links to the Amazon pages where you can order them on the Podcast by George web pages. And please, listen to Podcast by George on podcastbygeorge.com, on Facebook, on Twitter. We're on Google Play. We're on Spotify. We're on the iHeart Radio app. We're on YouTube. I just want you to listen to Podcast by George and, get to listen to some great things like Rebecca Schneid, a survivor of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Parkland, Florida school shooting. And that's another Podcast by George.